reckon the nuclear debate's gone off track in this country. We just don't seem to be. In fact, I noticed the Environment Minister is being accused of getting his information on nuclear power from The Simpsons. It's gone off track because you don't seem to be able to have a serious discussion about whether it is an optional power source which can be used safely. It's become political because the Greens and everybody will have kittens if anybody mentions nuclear power. Well, a young man, a year 11 student from Brisbane, addressed a Senate committee yesterday about atomic energy. Year 11. Will Shackle, good morning.
Good morning, Neil, and thanks for having me on.
Thank you. How old are you?
I'm 16, year 11, like you said.
So how did you get to be addressing a Senate committee?
Well, earlier this year I made a submission to the Senate committee, and I think there was around 150 individuals and groups from across Australia who wanted to express their views on nuclear energy, who did make a submission to that committee. And then eventually that all culminated in this day of evidence yesterday, where there was a few groups and myself included. I was representing myself as an individual on behalf of my organisation, Nuclear for Australia. And basically we were all quizzed by the senators and gave our evidence for and against the nuclear prohibition here in Australia.
What's your organisation? You've started this, did you? Nuclear for Australia.
Yes, so it's the first youth-led campaign for nuclear energy in Australia, and that was started in around January off the back of my support for the legalisation of nuclear energy here in Australia.
Why do you support nuclear energy? Why get into lobbying for it?
Well, look, Australia is experiencing a climate and energy crisis, and we need absolutely every solution on the table, especially a proven solution like nuclear energy. When you look around the world, there's about 32 countries which currently use nuclear energy, 50 which are considering implementing nuclear energy. And that also includes countries like Italy, which have been quite notorious for their shutdown of nuclear power plants. That was a recent development.
Yeah.
So the world's on board with nuclear energy. The reason I support it is because it's a really unique solution, nuclear. Unlike fossil fuels, it is clean and safe. And unlike renewables, it is proven and reliable. And I think that was the consensus from yesterday's evidence. And we heard not only from myself, and obviously I'm in the capacity of a 16-year-old there, but there's many, many experts. And I'd say the consensus was very clear that we should at least consider nuclear energy if we are to reach our missions and energy security goals.
All of which is you've said is true, apart from one question: is what do you do with the waste? How do you dispose of that safely?
Well, look, when you look in Australia, currently our national grid is dominated by fossil fuels, and the question I would have is, what do we do with the waste from that? Really, the waste from fossil fuels, all the emissions just end up in our atmosphere for all time. They're trapped in the atmosphere. There's no way we're dealing with that. And that leads to millions of deaths around the world. I think it's been estimated that in terms of coal-fired power stations, 5,000 people die from that waste, from our current fossil fuel production. So in terms of specifically nuclear waste, there's many solutions. And I would say the nuclear waste term is probably not the best one. I'd probably refer to it as spent fuel. First of all, it's incredibly dense nuclear energy. So there's not actually not much waste as it is actually produced. I think Matt Canavan used this yesterday as an example. Basically, the amount of waste produced from a person's, if they were powered by nuclear energy for their entire life, would be the equivalent of a Rubik's Cube. And if you were to amass all of the nuclear waste ever created around the world, I'm sure that would fit in within the MCG. It's incredibly minute amount of waste. And you have to also consider the waste which is created by renewables like solar and wind. Okay. Look, there's been recycling programs, but they're not viable. So,
well, why the prejudice? Why is there this high level, and it comes from high level, prejudice against nuclear power?
Look, I have absolutely no idea. I think I've only been on this earth for 16 years, but I think the issue was, I would imagine back in the 80s with all the propaganda that was being pushed out around nuclear energy, the misinformation propagated about it. And I think that's, unfortunately, Chris Bowen still retains some of those views around nuclear energy, which were evident in that video he produced.
Do you watch The Simpsons? You ever seen The Simpsons?
No, I don't.
Oh.
But I've heard.
He did seem to get his ideas from The Simpsons.
Look, that video was definitely condemned yesterday in the evidence. There were some factual inaccuracies there, and I think there's a reason he took it down within a few hours. For some reason, he put it back up.
I think
there's now a fact check label on it as well.
But you've also touched on something pretty important there. The reason there is opposition to nuclear energy is that it is, or nuclear power rather, is political. Nobody's got the political will to pursue it.
Look, I think it is. And look, it shouldn't be political. I know the coalition just came out with an announcement. Obviously, it would have been better if they had announced it a decade ago and actually took some action. But you look around the world, nuclear energy is supported on a bipartisan basis. You look in the United States, where there's been investment from Biden on it. Ted Torminen from Finland, she's from the Finnish Greens. She recently came to Australia advocating for nuclear. And the Greens in Finland are supporting nuclear. Same as UK. There's no reason why nuclear shouldn't be a bipartisan issue.
Oh, well, I agree.
Yeah.
It's got to be properly debated at the very least. Now, most 16-year-olds are worried about footy and running around being stupid. What's got you into nuclear power?
Look, what I would say is the poor, and I said this in my initial statement yesterday, the poor choices that are made by politicians for our generation will be the consequences of which will be the consequences our generation are condemned to. So, look, I think there's a lot of young people aren't too focused on this, but I look at, the effects of climate change, what that could possibly do when the climate change tipping points probably inevitably will pass. You look at even in terms of energy bills, energy insecurity, that's something I'm really fearful of. And I think something definitely most Australians have felt in their lives, and it shouldn't be something we have to put up with. Okay. And Chris Minns a few months ago said, we're trying to, let's hope we don't get blackouts. We're doing everything we can not to have a blackout. Look, we shouldn't have to accept that risk. There should be no risk of blackouts. We should be doing everything in our power to mitigate any risk, and that means having all options on the table, especially nuclear energy.
William, what do you want to do with your life when you finish school, university? What do you want to? You're going to be a nuclear physicist, or what's on? What do you want?
Look, I was asked this on Sunrise as well yesterday, and I don't have any answer for you. I'm keeping all options open, but obviously I'm very preoccupied by the nuclear energy debate in Australia, because I think someone has to trigger a debate. Yesterday was a real turning point, I think, in the nuclear debate. It got.
Do you have a website for Nuclear for Australia?
Yep.
I thought you would.
So currently we don't have a website, but we do have a petition, and that's got, I think I looked today, over 6,000 signatures. So if your listeners are interested in nuclear energy being legalised, they can sign our petition at change.org/nuclear for Australia, and that support would be greatly apprecited. And if they could share that as well,
all right.
All the better.
Thank you. We'll put that online with our interview with you. Good luck with the rest of your life. William Shackle, founder of Nuclear for Australia, age 16. If you just came in late to that interview, age 16, change.org/nuclear for Australia.